The air in the marble lobby of the Grand Athenaeum Hotel was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, confident hum of old money. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small vehicle, cast a fractured golden light over a sea of black tuxedos and shimmering evening gowns. It was the annual Sentinel Foundation Gala, a night where the city's philanthropic elite gathered to write checks that had more zeros than most people's phone numbers. They were here to support veterans, a cause universally agreed upon as noble, especially from the comfortable distance of a $500 a plate dinner. Near the grand entrance, a man stood who did not belong to this world of polished leather shoes and discreetly powerful watches. He was a piece of gravel in a glass of champagne. His boots were scuffed but clean, laced tight over worn denim. A leather vest, weathered to the soft gray of a stormy sky, was stretched across a broad chest. It was a canvas of patches, an American flag, a bald eagle mid-scream, the insignia of a unit most people in the room wouldn't recognize, and a large center patch that read simply, Nomad. His beard was a neatly trimmed salt and pepper spade. His hair was tied back in a short, severe tail, and his hands, resting calmly at his sides, were maps of scars and tattoos that crept from beneath the cuffs of his worn flannel shirt. He wasn't trying to get in. He was simply standing, observing the flow of guests with an unnerving stillness. This, in itself, was a disruption. A security guard, a young man named Peterson whose uniform was still stiff with newness, approached him. Peterson's posture was a careful study in non-confrontational authority. "Good evening, sir," Peterson began, his voice a little too loud. "Can I help you with something? The service entrance is around the back if you have a delivery." The man turned his head slowly, his gaze level and unblinking. It wasn't hostile, but it carried a weight that made the young guard's rehearsed lines feel flimsy. "Not making a delivery." His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "Right. Well, this is a private event, sir. Black tie only." Peterson gestured vaguely at the man's attire, then at the glittering crowd. "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to wait outside." A few guests, waiting for their partners to emerge from the coat check, watched the exchange with mild amusement. A woman in a sapphire dress whispered something to her husband, who chuckled and shook his head. The message was clear. Look at this lost soul, this relic from a different, grittier world, thinking he could just wander in here. The man didn't move. He didn't argue. He simply stood his ground, a granite boulder in a manicured garden. "I have an invitation." Peterson's professional patience began to fray. "Sir, the invitation specifies the dress code. There are standards. I'm just doing my job." The stalemate hung in the air for another 30 seconds before Peterson, clearly out of his depth, spoke into the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, I've got a situation at the main entrance. Could you send Ms. Albright, please?" A moment later, a woman with a severe blonde bob and a frantic energy contained within a sleek black pantsuit clicked across the marble floor. This was Catherine Albright, the event planner. Her entire career was a testament to her ability to manage chaos, to smooth over imperfections until they ceased to exist. This man was an imperfection of the highest order. "What is the problem here, Peterson?" she asked, her voice sharp and clipped. She didn't look at the biker. She addressed the uniform, the symbol of order she expected to be maintained. "This gentleman is refusing to leave, ma'am. He claims he has an invitation, but, well," Peterson's gesture said the rest. Catherine Albright finally turned her full attention to the man, Her eyes did a swift, dismissive scan from his boots to his beard. It was the kind of look that could appraise, categorize, and discard a person in under a second. "Sir," she said, her tone dripping with the kind of strained politeness reserved for difficult children and the hopelessly confused. "This is a private, formal gala for the Sentinel Foundation. I'm sure you've made a mistake. Perhaps the event you're looking for is at a different venue." The man's expression didn't change. He met her gaze without flinching. "No mistake." A tinny voice crackled in Catherine's earpiece, a welcome distraction. "Catherine, where are we with Colonel Miller? He's not in the green room, not answering his cell. We're scheduled to start introductions in 8 minutes. General Compton is getting antsy." Catherine pressed a finger to her ear, her focus shifting inward. "I'm handling a situation at the door. Has anyone checked the hotel bar? The suite?" She was a conductor whose lead violinist had just vanished. A thread of panic wove itself into her voice. "Find him. Now." She turned back to the biker, her patience completely gone. The problem of her missing keynote speaker had fused with the problem of the man standing in front of her. He was now not just an eyesore, he was a waste of her rapidly dwindling time. "Look, I don't have time for this. You need to leave. Now. Peterson, escort him from the premises." The biker didn't wait for the guard to touch him. He reached slowly into the inner pocket of his leather vest, the movement deliberate and unhurried. The guests who were still watching tensed slightly. Peterson put a hand on his belt. Catherine took an involuntary step back. He didn't pull out a weapon. He didn't pull out a wallet. He produced a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper, folded into a neat square. It was the event program, identical to the ones being handed out by ushers inside the ballroom. It was creased and softened from being carried in his pocket, a well-worn map. He held it out to her. Catherine stared at the offered paper as if it were a snake. Annoyance warred with a sliver of curiosity. With a sigh that communicated the immense burden of her evening, she snatched it from his hand. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning for a ticket, a voucher, some kind of credential she could use to finally dismiss him. But it was just the program. She saw the evening's schedule: 7 p.m. cocktails, 8 p.m. dinner, 9:15 p.m. welcoming remarks by General Marcus Compton, and then, at 9:30 p.m., the main event. Her eyes froze on the text. Keynote address. Colonel J.D. Miller, retired, former commander, 75th Ranger Regiment Special Troops Battalion, recipient of the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, and 3 Purple Hearts. Author of The Long Walk Home. Her gaze flicked down to the bottom of the page, to the brief bio she herself had approved weeks ago. It described a 30-year career, operations in places the public had never heard of, a man who had led other men through unimaginable hardship, a legend in certain circles, a man they were paying a substantial honorarium to inspire a room full of donors, a man known to his troops by a single, simple call sign. Her eyes lifted from the page and met the calm, steady gaze of the man in the leather vest. She looked at the program, then back at him. The name on the page, the title, the legend, and the call sign. In the military, a call sign often came from a story. Sometimes it was ironic, sometimes literal. She looked at the patches sewn onto his vest, the symbols of his tribe, the story of his life written in thread and leather. She saw the eagle, the flag, and the patch that simply said, Nomad. And then she saw a smaller, older one, half hidden near his collar. It was a simple, embroidered word. Patch. The blood drained from Catherine Albright's face. The polished marble lobby seemed to tilt beneath her heels. The hum of the crowd faded to a dull roar in her ears. The imperfection, the gravel in the champagne, the man she had just ordered to be thrown out like trash was not just a guest. He was the reason they were all here. He was Colonel J.D. Patch Miller. For a moment, she was paralyzed. Her mind, usually a whirlwind of logistics and contingency plans, was a complete blank. Peterson, the young guard, saw the look on her face and took a half step forward. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" Catherine couldn't speak. She could only stare at the man, at the quiet dignity he held, the utter lack of triumph, or "I told you so" in his eyes. He had known, all along, who he was. He had simply waited for her to figure it out. He had let her judge him, dismiss him, and reveal the full scope of her own prejudice without saying a word in his own defense. She finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "Oh my God." She looked at Peterson, her eyes wide with horror. "Stand down, Peterson. Stand down." She turned back to Colonel Miller, the program still clutched in her trembling hand. "Colonel, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. We were expecting your publicity photo." The words tumbled out, useless and inadequate. The photo on file had been 10 years old, a clean-shaven man in a crisp dress uniform. It bore little resemblance to the weathered man who stood before her. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was not forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement of fact. He reached out and gently took the program from her hand, folding it with the same care he had used before, and tucked it back inside his vest. "The general is waiting," he said, his voice even. It was not an accusation, merely a statement of the time. Catherine snapped back to professional mode, though her movements were jerky, her composure shattered. "Yes, of course. Right this way, Colonel. We have a green room for you. Water? Coffee?" "No, thank you," he said. "Let's just get it done." She turned and began to lead him through the lobby. The guests who had been watching the confrontation now watched this new, bizarre procession. The formidable Ms. Albright, now pale and flustered, leading the biker she had just tried to eject, walking with a purpose that brooked no argument. The whispers followed them like a wake behind a boat. Who was he? Why was Catherine fawning over him? The sea of tuxedos and gowns parted before them, a mixture of confusion and curiosity on every face. They bypassed the main ballroom doors and went through a side entrance into the frantic energy of the backstage area. Stagehands with headsets scurried about. The MC, a local news anchor with a plastic smile, was pacing nervously. "Catherine, thank God. We can't find the colonel anywhere. We're about to—" He stopped mid-sentence as he saw the man standing behind her. His smile faltered. Who's this? The service corridors are off limits during the show." Catherine shot him a look that could curdle milk. "This," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of residual panic and profound embarrassment, "is our keynote speaker. This is Colonel Miller." The MC's jaw went slack. He looked from Catherine's mortified face to the Colonel's impassive one. He blinked. You're kidding me." Colonel Miller just looked at him. "Get the general," Catherine hissed. "Tell him the colonel is here and we're ready. Now." A moment later, a barrel-chested man in his late 60s with a chest full of medals and a face like a friendly bulldog emerged from the wings. It was General Compton. His face broke into a wide, relieved grin when he saw the biker. "Patch, you son of a gun!" "I knew you'd cut it close," he boomed, striding forward and enveloping the colonel in a rough bear hug. "Gave my aide a heart attack. You look good, brother." You too, Marcus, Miller said, a flicker of warmth finally showing in his eyes as he clasped the general's shoulder. Just had a little delay at the door. He glanced briefly at Catherine, a look devoid of malice, but heavy with meaning. The general followed his gaze, raised an eyebrow, and seemed to understand everything in an instant. He gave Catherine a disappointed, knowing little shake of his head before turning back. Well, you're here now, the general said. The room is full of patriots with deep pockets. Go tell him a story, Patch. The MC, now sweating under the stage lights, stepped up to the podium. His introduction was flustered, his voice a half-octave higher than usual as he read the colonel's incredible list of accomplishments. With every medal named, every operation hinted at, a ripple of confusion went through the ballroom. The audience craned their necks, trying to reconcile the decorated war hero being described with the rough-looking man who now walked from the wings and took his place at the podium. He stood there for a long moment, his scarred hands resting on the sides of the lectern. He didn't adjust the microphone. He didn't shuffle any notes. He just looked out at them, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in the chandeliers, the fine china, the impeccably dressed donors. The silence grew, thick and uncomfortable. Then he began to speak. His voice, that low rumble from the lobby, needed no amplification. It filled the cavernous hall, a voice honed by years of giving orders in the din of battle and speaking quietly to grieving families. He didn't talk about budgets or fundraising goals. He talked about the cold of a mountain ridge in Afghanistan at 3 a.m. He talked about the color of the dust in Iraq. He talked about the weight of a friend's last letter in his pocket. He spoke of the promises made and the quiet cost of keeping them. He spoke of the transition from a world of absolute purpose to a world of ambiguity, of taking off a uniform and feeling like a ghost in your own country. He spoke about how a man's worth isn't measured by the